Jacob, we had a question from a believer in the UK. Said, "Hi, Jacob. I'm having a conversation with someone at the moment about replacement theology, and they brought up some scriptures that they think confirm that God has broken the covenant with the Jews. Anyway, they also just brought up Zechariah chapter 11, verses 10 through 11, and said that this shows that God will break his covenant."
First of all, thank you for your question. It's a very good question. And it's a good question not only because these passages can mislead people who have heard these arguments, but it's a quintessential example of the ignorance of the people who misuse these texts, particularly Zechariah 11, to contend for the doctrinal error of replacement theology. Now, it's a little bit problematic. In both Jeremiah and Zechariah, you do have you've got a verse difference between the Hebrew text and the English translations in Jeremiah. But let me read it in English, and then I'll explain the nuances of the Hebrew and show why it cannot possibly be true. In Zechariah chapter 11, verse 10, we read the following: "I took my staff favor and cut it in pieces, to break my covenant which I had made with all the peoples. So it was broken on that day, and thus the afflicted of the flock who were watching me realized that it was the word of the Lord. And I said to them, it is good in your sight, give me my wages, but if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then the Lord said to me, throw into the potter that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I threw the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord." Now, Zechariah chapter 11 is obviously speaking on two different planes. He's speaking prophetically about the first coming of Jesus. We have a prophecy here in this passage about Judas Iscariot and the 30 pieces of silver for which Jesus would be betrayed. It was the price for which he was valued. Now, this has to do with the typology of Joseph, but it also has to do with the half shekel of silver for the firstborn, the Pidyon Haben, and various other things we've covered on our teaching tapes explaining the uses of the Hebrew word kesef, or silver, as the price of redemption. Silver being a metal that is not exactly corrosive, but it certainly tarnishes, and it's only of temporary value, as opposed to gold, which is non-corrosive. Nonetheless, you have this idea of Judas Iscariot. But whenever we see something about Judas Iscariot, the Holy Spirit is talking about the son of perdition. It's something that in some way alludes to the Antichrist to come, who's also the son of perdition. Zechariah is speaking for the first coming of Christ, and he's speaking for the second. Now, let's look at this. The Lord said to me, or in verse 10, I took my staff favor and cut it in pieces. That word there for staff, it's called noam, which means pleasantness. It's something good, something pleasant. And it's not just broken. The Hebrew term is not lishbar, but it is chopped or smashed. The term is ligdoa, irreparably smashed completely, okay? Now, this would stand in contradiction to other passages which says he will never break his covenant. Nonetheless, let's look at this carefully. He goes on to say, and I counseled my wife with this. My wife, although a mathematician by profession, and although I speak Hebrew, my wife has a degree in biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. She's actually a Hebrew linguist as well as a mathematician. And I had her go through this text with me. And believe me, she's a concordance incarnate. We went through this very carefully from the Hebrew. The Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price and so on. But before that, the staff is broken. It's smashed irreparably. And its name is Noam, which is also a male name even in modern Hebrew of a pleasant person, or literally a nice a nice person, a nice male person. But let's look here. If it was talking about the covenant with Israel, the term would be Ami, my people. But the term is not Ami. You have the adjective kol, meaning all. Kol Amim, all peoples, all ethnic nations, not Israel. If it was Israel specific, it would use the possessive singular of the word people. Ami, my people. But it doesn't say that. It says kol amim, all peoples. It is not talking about the covenant with Israel. Well, what is it talking about then? Let us look. It can only be two other things. The Noahide covenant made with Noah, or some other covenant undefined. It can't be the new covenant, because the new covenant in Jeremiah 31:31 tells us the new covenant was made or literally cut with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And the New Testament says it's an everlasting covenant. So it cannot in any primary sense be the new covenant. Not only that, but it's not just broken, it's irreparably smashed. It's something going to be finished. It alludes most likely, or refers most likely, not alludes, most likely to the Noahide covenant. God gave a bow, a symbol of the Holy Spirit. You've got the 7 colors of the spectrum, okay, atmospherically refracted in the rainbow, okay? And thus, in the book of Revelation, where you see the eternal throne of God, you see the rainbow, that's the Holy Spirit, okay? The 7-fold spirits of God from the book of Revelation, represented by the rainbow. He gives his spirit as a pledge of his covenant, okay? That he would never again destroy the earth by fire, okay? But it is interesting. There are passages in Peter, and possibly Zechariah, but certainly in Peter, that speak of the dissolution of the stoichia. In other words, atomic fission in sufficient quantities to destroy the world. And there's no other thing you can make out of it in Greek. The elements will be dissolved with fire, and the earth and the works that are upon it will be burned up. Prior to Einstein and Oppenheimer and those people in the 20th century, this would not even have been fathomable. The Greeks only theorized the existence of atoms, and they certainly didn't know about subatomic particles. Anyway, when God destroyed the earth by water, it was hydrogen, hydros, okay? On the periodic chart, atomic number 1, hydros. But a hydrogen bomb, the most common nuclear weapon, is likewise from the same element. So you get explosive infernal energy from the fission of hydros, the same as you get the flood from hydros. This was a covenant made with all people. All people. After the faithful church is rescued, the kingdom of Antichrist comes, the day of the Lord takes place, and ultimately the judgment of God on the fallen world and the kingdom of Antichrist will be something that is prefigured, Jesus told us, as in the days of Noah. That's what society and the world will be like. But there will be some, like Noah and his family, who are rescued, type figure of the rapture. The New Testament makes reference to this twice in the Gospels at least, and twice in the epistles. So it's a covenant not with Israel, it's with all peoples. The covenant of Moses, the Mosaic covenant, and the patriarchal promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for the land, etc., that we read about in the book of Genesis chapter 17 and so forth. These things are with Israel. Ami, my people. This is a different covenant. It is the one made with all peoples. Amin. Now you can even see this in the English text. it says so. I took my staff favor and cut it to pieces to break my covenant, which I had made with all peoples. How do they get that to be the covenant with Israel? Israel are not all peoples. And in the Hebrew, it's even more emphatic because of kol and the plural amim, the yud mem, meaning multiple ethnic nations or peoples. The person who told you this doesn't even seem to be able to handle the English text too well. And they certainly have no idea of the original meaning of the original language. It's an absurd argument. Now, this idea of the Lord would undo this covenant, it's lehafer, meaning to undo or to go against something declared previously. Lehafer. It is interestingly found also in Jeremiah 31, same term. And again, I thank my wife for helping me with this. Her Hebrew is, well, again, I can speak Hebrew and read it and so forth, but my wife is a Hebrew linguist. Let's look at Jeremiah 31/32, because you have a verse difference between the English text and the Masoretic canon. Let's look at Jeremiah chapter 31 and see what it says. I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah, not like the one I made with their fathers, but then it continues. In the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke. Haferu, haferu, same term as you find in Zechariah 11. Lehafer is the infinitive. Zechariah 11 has the infinitive. Lehafer, haferu. They broke it. Okay? Yet in Jeremiah 31, we see that the Lord is never going to give up his people. This is continued well into chapter 32. What these people are saying is ignorant nonsense. Please tell them I said so. If they learned it from their pastor, tell their pastor I will debate him from the Hebrew canon. Whoever told you this doesn't know what they're talking about. It's a covenant made with all peoples. It's not the covenant made with Israel. It's two different covenants. Now, again, it has a specific eschatological meaning for the last days as well. I won't go into that now. There's no need to elaborate on it further. But that's the answer to your question. Thank you so much. God bless. My name is James Jacob Prasch.